Welcome everybody to the second and final bit of this New Testament in Greek. Very interesting little project for me. I'm enjoying it very much. I hope you are as well. The sewing on this one, interesting for a couple of reasons. One is that little Coptic stitch in the middle, which I thought would be a nice little touch to just run a narrow little set of stitches up the middle. I did not realize when I started it what a pain that would turn out to be. But I think in the end it was a nice little feature. And we'll see it on the finished product. It's a nice little nuance that I at least will notice and appreciate. When you've done a lot of work on a book like this, it's nice to have little special bits of it that catch your eye and you think, yeah, that's a nice detail. As always, the first few signatures are very finicky. They slide around a lot. They don't have very much weight to them. So it's difficult to get things just to stay in place when you start pulling knots and pulling strings through. And it's nice to get 5, 6, 7 signatures in where you've got a bit of heft. So I do a square knot here, and I always throw an extra one on with the waxed thread because it tends to be a bit more prone to slip through a knot, even a well-tied knot. And I cut off enough to get that out of the way. Once it's glued, it'll be very solid anyway, but you want to keep a bit of an end on there. This paper is a little bit weak. There's a lot of repairs going on along here, and of course it is only 2 bifolds per signature. So a lot of layers of thread. So when we do get this thing finally sewn up, it has a lot of play to it, which can be a problem, but I'm going to try and turn it to my advantage. A modern sheet on the outside to give it a little bit of extra strength, protect it from the edges, from any extra wear that might come from being up against those covers. There we go. Now look at the amount of spine swell in this. I thought we were going to do pretty well with it, but there's a fair bit going on there once that thread's in there. Now we could just curve the spine like this, round the spine over. But if we do that, look at the depth we get on this side. Now, for some books, that's okay. It gives kind of a wizard's tome kind of a feel, but I want to avoid that. First, let's get these tabs secure in what I call an insert. I started doing this because just the tabs alone get a lot of vertical play. And when putting the leather on and gluing the leather, there's an up and down dimension that I then need to pay attention to. And if I can secure that now, it's one less thing to think about when I'm trying to line everything up for the leather. You'll see what I mean when you try this and suddenly your cover goes on, and instead of being able to shift up and down, it's just locked right in there like another set of pages, like another signature. And all it is that extra little bifold I put on. The outermost sheet gets folded back, leaving one fresh end sheet that I can attach the end papers to later. Now here's a little bit of experimenting that I'm doing. Rather than one big rounded end, I've maneuvered these into being like 4 small rounded books. It was a bit tricky, but I have a way I think I'm going to make kind of a jig that'll make it easier to do that next time, assuming this works. But I'm hopeful thus far. What I will need for it, though, is a lot of glue. I don't want to be shy when I glue this thing up, because it has some depth there to fill, but also because these are old pages that have seen a lot of years, a lot of wear, a lot of weakening from moisture. So we'll get a nice first coat on there, seal up all the nooks and crannies. I'm not too worried about it spilling onto the side of these boards a little bit, because I know from experience it'll peel right off. So that is one layer of glue. The holes are all sealed up, so I'm going to just lift it up a bit now, expose some of that beautiful stitching on the side, that cool architecture of the book that's showing through. There we go, and then we'll tighten this up. These little bamboo vices actually work pretty well. It's not got near the power of the big iron press, but it's nice to be able to have the book upright. I might figure out a way to do a horizontal iron press one of these days when I'm back in a bigger workshop. But as I'm in the dining room bindery right now, we will use this little one to best effect. You see that nice thick layer of glue on there? Now on the other side of the book, we have freshly cut pages, except for this bottom bit that did not come through very well. And I didn't notice it at the time, or it shifted afterwards. But I have this little, it's not a Dremel, but it's the same kind of deal as a Dremel that I got off Temu for very little money. And I'm just going to take rag the edges off that. Right now I'm just taking the bulk down till it's more or less in line with the pages. You can see it's starting to blend in now. And the key at this point is I don't want that repair of the ragged edges to look odd. I want it to blend right in. So now, very, very light touch, but I spread out that sanding. Catch any other little bits sticking up that I find. With this rag paper, sometimes it flexes, and I think it gets the ends sticking out a little bit. You can take care of those. And wind up with a nice, smooth, even finish. Don't worry if there's a bit of discoloration there, because we're going to cover that over anyway. It's the smooth feel of it that matters. Now you may have noticed there a bit of darker brown on top. I started with a really dark brown and then changed my mind on it. I want something that's going to be lighter than the covers, still rich, still dark. I want it to be darker than the browned pages inside the book so that they appear brighter, but darker than the cover of the book, because it's always nice to have a dark cover with slightly lighter end pages. You can go the other way around, but you really have to choose your colors well. Now we are going on to make the boards on the front and back. Full disclosure, I did this twice. The first time I did it, I don't know how I messed up on my measuring, but it was about 1 centimeter shorter than the book. It was a late night session. I think that might have been the problem. Would have been better to leave that one till morning. But here we go. Double check. We know that this is a good height for the book. We've got a nice width measurement. Don't forget to account for a couple of millimeters of overhang or a 1/16 of an inch or something if you're imperial minded. Just eyeball it and get an idea of what you want to overhang. Consistency is the biggest thing to worry about here. You want the top, the bottom, so the head, the tail, and the end of the page overhang to all be even. 2 to 3 millimeters is probably best. So if I do 2 here and then we get a millimeter of leather wrapping around it, that'll be a nice feel. Too much and it starts to really feel like duck feet hanging over the edges. And also the pages inside will tend to sag. Whereas if it's not so high, even if they do sag, they're not going to sag far until they hit ground. If it's up higher, they'll just keep going and going. Basically what I do is I try and clear the headband and tailband, which will stick up about a millimeter on either side. Now this book isn't quite right angles. So it's taken a little bit of finessing to get that to be even all the way around the outside of the book. It's very rare with these old books to be able to cut them completely square. They're just kind of too shifty. They flex a little too much. And in the course of repairing them, nothing's going to be quite 90 degrees. That's part of the charm of these handmade, remade books. I like the look of that very slightly burnished brown on the ends of the pages. So a nice liberal coat here, but you don't want a lot of that white streaking and puddling there because you don't want it to squish out around the edges and risk gluing your pages. So I'm going to just take off some of this so that we have a thick but still translucent layer of glue on there. Yeah, it's about right there, I'd say. Line this up very carefully. The outside corners are very important. Make sure your top and bottom edges are lined up. And if it's a bit off in where it connects to the spine, that's not going to matter. It's not going to show. Try and get it as perfect as you can. But if there's any bit of misalignment, that's where you want it to be. You don't want it to be around the outside. If it is around the outside, you'll want to trim. Okay. Feeling solid. Let's give another layer on the back here. Working to get some of the glue flowing in there in between the high points. And then we are going to give this book some extra strength. Little bits of paper that you cut off when you're making end papers or hollows or whatever are really useful when it comes to just filling up the spine, the lower parts in the spine. I want to raise this up so it's even with the height of the knots and the ribbons. So in these low spots there, I'll do several layers of paper. Sometimes I'll use a layer of thin gray board. Depends how flexible I want the book to be. This one I want to be able to flex a fair bit, but it is going to feel almost like a flat-backed book. So we'll pull this down there, kind of a unifying piece top to bottom to help me see where we might need a little more lift. It doesn't need to be perfectly level. Sometimes people will build it up and sand it down and get it perfectly smooth and level. And there's nothing wrong with that either. This one's going to be a little bit more rustic than that. By the time we get a hollow on there and leather wrapped around it, and then give it a year, it'll be smooth, smooth, smooth. It won't want to crack or anything like that. It'll be good and solid. Here are some French lessons that will serve as our nice hollow. Now I want to measure the width of the spine there, and I tend to back it up about 1 millimeter or maybe 2. I don't like it to hang out around the corners. I'm not sure physics-wise which is better. If anybody has an opinion, let me know. An educated opinion, or just an opinion. Doesn't hurt to hear your thoughts. Okay, now you'll notice this is not as tall as the book. I want to leave room on the top and the bottom for the leather to wrap around the cover and the spine. Some will do the hollow, the full length of the book, and then just cut it at the top and bottom. But I wonder if that doesn't start a tear that then later on would work its way all the way through. I don't know. But I know this works. Just center that, and then make sure it's pressed on all the way around. This one's actually wider than I normally make. This one does wrap around the outsides just a little bit. You can notice the stitching here a little bit on the sides that's exposed. I'm going to try some fun stuff with that a little later on, a little subtle detail. You notice there's a triangular section cut out of the top of this there. But because this is narrower than that, I'm going to cut that part off and use the square bit. I am using scissors there. Normally I'd use my razor knife, but I thought I left it at the library, when in actuality it is right behind me on the table. But for this portion, I'm just going to carefully use the scissors. Not my favorite for this kind of cutting on gray board, but does the trick if you're careful. There we go. That's the right width. You want it the width of the book, including the cover boards. You don't want it too narrow here. You don't want it just the width of the text block. It'll just look much more natural and nicer if it goes out right to the edges. Nice square back to the book. Even if it's a rounded spine, it'll be a nice chunky back. Now these are just store-bought headbands and tailbands. You don't need to sew your own end bands if you don't want to. I sometimes will use these and then I'll sew over them. And occasionally I'll make my own too, depending on the book. This brown's about perfect. Got a little bit of flash with this lavender bookmark. I wouldn't use a thick one in such a bright color when everything else isn't bright. But because it's just a couple of millimeters wide, I think it works as just a little accent. Just to give a little pop there. And as always, I like to cover that over with a little piece of paper just to give it a bit of extra support there, a bit of extra adhesion to the spine, so that when I'm flipping the leather over and jabbing around in there, getting it flat, I don't take off my end bands with it. That paper helps to kind of protect them. It's smoother and doesn't catch the tools as much as the actual end band fabric would. Now here, make sure it lines up with the covers, but also top to bottom, make sure it lines up. So side to side, it should be lined up and parallel. Top to bottom, it should be nice and balanced and even with the boards. If you have the ribbons on the boards without that folded over paper, here's one of those instances where it makes it very hard to line up your spine with those outer boards, because those outer boards can shift so easily. Once they're locked into that paper, they don't. gives a nice frame of reference. Now this symbol is the Chi Rho. The X is the Chi, and the kind of shepherd's crook thing is a Rho. Greek letters, and they're the first two letters in Christos. So in Christ. So that was an early symbol of the Christians. Started out as a faction of Judaism. And then when they split apart in the first couple of hundred years after Jesus, we call that the Common Era, when we have those two religions in common rather than as the same thing. So at the beginning of the Common Era, very early on, the Chi Rho was a popular symbol. Now I mentioned the stitching on the side before. Here I'm going to, rather than hide it, I'm going to highlight it. And I'll take these raised bands that are sometimes called false bands because they're meant to mimic the structure of the book. And I'm going to line them up with actual features of the structure of the book and see if I can't get a nice wraparound effect where I'm blending the purely decorative bands with the functional bits of the book itself. I'll explain that a little bit better when I have a better view here. Right there, you see the kettle stitch, the ribbon, the Coptic stitch, the other ribbon, and the other kettle stitch. Now I'm just putting on there. So the wider ribbons get a wider band. The narrow ones get a narrow band. And it'll line up quite nicely. Just having a once over of the book, seeing if I like the feel of it, deciding whether I'm going to decorate the back. And this one I didn't. I want a conservative feel to this book. Restrained elegance. I often lay the book down and trace around it. Here I'm drawing out the basic shape of it first. It's a rectangle, nothing too complicated, but I'll draw that out. And before I cut, though, I'm going to lay the book in there and make sure everything lines up. I trace around here so that in this case where I'm starting my gluing on the spine, I know where that spine is. I know where everything's supposed to line up. I want to use the foam and the big metal press that I have at the library in order to stick the leather to the front of the book. So I'm going to do the spine here first, and then we'll take a trip down there. We have a second press now that we'll get running at the library, and then I'll bring my other one home and have one here to use as well. So I line this up. No matter how well I line these up, it always winds up being a little bit different once I get it stretched around the spine. And as long as you've done careful measuring and you lay it down carefully, you'll be close enough that that extra bit you leave around the outside will be more than enough to manipulate and trim to get the nice, perfect fit you want. So here we have those ribbons, nice and easy to see. The ribbons and the stitches all lined up with the false bands. It's a nice effect so far. We'll see if it carries on once the leather's on there. It might even get better. That's the plan. So a nice firm pull on that. And then I load it into the vise. This is PVA, it's not paste, but even as PVA, there's plenty of time to get these tied up. Work the bands in there. As usual, even though I have the strings there, I'm going to push in the bone folder, get it nice and tight if I can. I like those little long indentations on either side of the bands. There are tools you can use. You can get specific tools that help when to do that. The string works well too, though. And then I've pushed bone folders in there to tighten it up. And after a little while drying, let's see how we did. It's always very satisfying, this bit. One of my favorite parts of a nice book. I think it's because where the action really happens, we give the front cover a lot of press. But if that spine isn't properly done, everything falls apart. All right, looking very good. Quick jump down to the library where I glued that, even though I didn't get that on film for you. Apologies. And we'll get this pressed down. Let it spend about 10 minutes in there and then pop it out again. And that 10 minutes is enough to get the leather pressed right down into those indentations and set. Really happy with that. Wanted a feel of it being carved into stone, just with an improvised tool or something, and just evoke that early Christian sect. I'm cutting these corners 45 degrees to the book. It is awkward even without trying to film it. Trying to film it and do this is a bit acrobatic, but I think we did okay. Get all 4 corners cut. Again, don't try and do it all in one cut. And then I'll take out these little bits here so that when this folds up together, they should meet and cover this corner without a lot of extra material sticking out, making it pointy. But as I've said before, I try and cut it a bit proud. I try and cut it with a little more leather than I think it's going to need. I can always trim it back, but it's really hard to fix if you cut too much off. Sometimes it can be done, but it's tricky. Now here, I don't want too much extra leather in the spine either. Once that folds over, so I want lots to go around the spine of the book and get in there solid, but I don't want more than I need. So I'm starting with the bottom of the book, because with both flaps on the top and the bottom out, it can be a bit harder to handle. And if I make any errors, I want it to be on the bottom of the book, where it's less easy to see. And if there's anything I need to fix, the repairs will be more invisible. As it turned out on this one, though, it wrestled me a little bit, but I won in the end. And so did the book, because it got a nice, solid, protective layer of leather on it in the end. There we go. Again, a little hard to get that on film and still be able to get my fingers and tools in there where they need to be. There we go. Once that slides into place, it feels great. And it wants to stay. Once it's bent around like that, it's quite happy staying there. And with it all tucked away, we can focus on doing a nice, clean, easy job on the top. Fair bit of glue here. I make sure I get lots in near the cardboard. Not because it needs the adhesion so much, but I want to moisten up that leather. Get it a bit wet where it curls around the board. Just helps it to take on a new shape on a permanent basis. trick is to get it folded over in that little narrow gap. Once it's there, then you can squidgy things around a little bit with the small bone folder, press out any wrinkles to the sides. And then when I close it up, I can shape that spine now. Make sure everything is sitting where I want it to sit. Great. The top and the bottom look solid. These ends are quite long, and that's good because if I need to hide some extra length of the leather or stretch it out a little bit, then I have room to do that. In this case, I'm hiding a little bit. You see, I'm letting it wrinkle and then compress and flatten. So I have more than enough leather than I need on that one. Not too much, but more than I need by just a little bit. And then I'm going to fill this in to make it all level, so I want to trim the leather off, make it nice and square. It makes it easy to measure the piece of board that I'm going to put in there. Technically, you wouldn't have to do this, but it will show a little seam usually where the leather transitions to the paper. Unless you have a thick end paper and you use thin sheets to get really, really perfect on this, and then it won't show. But here, this one, it may or it may not. It'll be that close. I don't mind showing a little bit of the structure of the book. It's not a flaw to my eyes so much as a little peekaboo into the secrets of what went on to get that book to what it is now. The text block here is about 7 years older than the United States. That's a frame of reference many people will be able to get. The United States is not an old country. My country, Canada, is younger yet. But it's still not a spring chicken compared to us. So I've chosen this nice rich color paper. It's got some hints of brown in it. It's got green and purple, but it's and yellow, but it's predominantly that maroon, reddish maroon color, which I think goes really well with this brown. Gives a pop of color, opening it up. And you notice the purple in it matches the bookmark. So as much an outlier as that bookmark might be on its own, when it's got just a little hint of that same color in the end papers, it actually ties the book together much better. You have two different structural components with colors that tie in and complement each other. And as always, measure twice, cut once. That's the hope. If you only measure once, you will at some point be cutting twice or more. Even if you measure twice, sometimes you might be cutting twice, but it'll be less. It'll be less often. Okay, now a nice gentle cut. It doesn't take much to cut through this paper, and you don't want to slide that ruler, which is on very slippery paper, so it's easy to do. And then you cut off a piece that is twice the size of your page. Let things press together, dry. Check everything. I have that acetate paper that I can reuse again and again as a blocker for the glue. Double check this. I usually cut it a bit longer than I need and then trim back. That works really well. Now I do have a sheet of acetate here to protect it so that the glue that goes over the edge isn't gluing the pages together at the end of this book. That said, I don't want to leave it just sitting there because if it dries, it will glue the acetate to the paper. Not really strongly, but it can be enough to tear the paper when it comes apart. So I'll move that out, grab a fresh one with no glue on it, slide it in there. Now we're good to go. A tiny little glue gets on that, it'll just pop right off. So here, lining up the bottom and the corner, if we're square. If we're not square, we might need to slide that end out a little bit, which is why making it a little bigger than you need lengthwise is good. So we've lined that up, squidge it into place, and then fold it over. I'm not going to glue the outside yet. I'm going to let that inside bit dry. Another benefit of that acetate, besides being a glue blocker, is that it doesn't allow moisture through. If you didn't have that, then your paper on the other side of the glue in your book, not just the end paper, but through into your book, will get all kind of ripply. So same process, the gluey one comes out, clean one goes in, line up with the bottom and the corner. See here, it doesn't quite line up with the end. Needs to be squidgied out and trimmed later if necessary. But we have those papers tied to the inside. We're going to take off that little bit of extra. Now be careful here that you don't cut too deep. I cut a little bit deeper than I wanted to and did mar the leather. But because this will line up exactly with the end of the leather, it will be hidden anyway. But normally I would be a bit lighter on that. And then if I did want to lay the paper in a little closer to the center of the book, I could do so. It wouldn't show a line or anything where the cut was. But as it happens, this one covers up what might have been an error. Get it nice and pressed in. And again, we're on moisture control, so I don't just want to close that. I want to put something in there so that that moisture coming out of the glue as it dries doesn't make the book wrinkly. And as always, repeat on the other side of the book. Line it up at the outside and then work that fold into the corner of the book. If there's any kind of a little wrinkle or something, I want it to be right deep in that fold. Avoid it if possible, but if you can't avoid things, put them in out of the way spots. Risk your errors in places not visible. Now, I normally lean toward the budget end of things when I'm showing videos, but this is one of our pricier tools. This is for doing blind tooling and gold work. In this case, I'm doing some blind tooling on the spine. I toyed with making this book quite flashy and then decided, no, in the spirit of the early Christian sect, I'm going to make it quite humble. Gets flashier later. So Novum Testamentum Graecum. New Testament in Greek. This is what she looked like before. And deteriorating very quickly. In rough shape. But not beyond help. Let's see what we got. Really rich and beautiful. Very happy with how this book turned out. Thanks very much, guys, for subscribing and for signing up on Patreon. Love to have your comments and really humbly appreciative of all your support, guys. Thank you so much. And I will be back soon with another video. Have a great week.